Un poquito menos, pero como hay 3 rondas, se puede recuperar el audio.
Okay. So eso. Gracias.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this side event, the first side event of today in the program in Spain's pavilion here at COP27. And a particular welcome from my organization, SEO BirdLife. We're the national representatives of BirdLife International in the country of Spain. And today's session here at COP27 is the first of 4 sessions that my organization is running today. There will be a further 2 sessions online on our YouTube channel and a 4th session at the end of the morning from the island of Menorca in Spain, where we are currently celebrating the 25th Spanish Ornithological Congress, and there's a special session on really the title of today's event, on reconciling renewable energy and biodiversity objectives for a true ecological transition. All of these events will be transmitted live on the Spanish Ministry's YouTube channel and also on SEO BirdLife's YouTube channel. If there are people here in the room or online who would like to follow it on Twitter or tweet comments or reactions, the Spain Pavilion Twitter handle is Spain COP27, and ourselves in SEO BirdLife, if you know, we have our own hashtag for this issue, which is called Renovables Responsables. Renovables Responsables. Thanks, of course, to our panel members. We have an excellent range of interests and experience and geographical distribution in our panel. So I'll briefly introduce them. Firstly, to my left, Gonzalo Sainz de Mierra, who's the Director of Climate Change and Alliances at Iberdrola, and also very active in a number of business coalitions, debating and pushing forward the climate, energy, and biodiversity agendas. To his left, I'm very happy to welcome Chiara Martinelli, who's the Director of Climate Action Network, CAN Europe, so the European office, which has a very active renewables campaign, and they're particularly focused on the need for a strong environmental and social perspective in this speedy implementation of renewable energy that we need this decade. And CAN Europe is the European part of CAN International, which of course is a very strong NGO presence here in the COP. To Chiara's left, I'm very happy to welcome Rachel. Rachel, through those 2 constituencies, which will be here, the party constituency and the civil society constituency. And finally, last and by no means least, at the end of have Rhiannon Niven, who is the Global Climate Change Policy Coordinator for BirdLife International. If we are BirdLife in Spain, Rhiannon is here to represent our nearly 120 national members in this amazing conservation partnership across the globe, which is called BirdLife International. So maybe to set the scene for the topic, we have a clear challenge, which is to decarbonize our energy system, to install zero-emission renewable energy at speed in this decade. We've heard this again and again at COPs and outside COPs. But at the same time, we have a desperate biodiversity crisis, an extinction crisis, with our ecosystems degraded. We're losing species at a terrifying rate, an unprecedented rate. And whether we're looking at biodiversity or whether we're looking at climate and energy, we have chosen to put 2030 as a marker to make as much progress as we possibly can in the next few years. And all of the scientists working on biodiversity and working on climate and the national governments have agreed through the two intergovernmental panels, the IPCC looking at climate change and IPBES looking at biodiversity and ecosystems, agreed in a report issued last year that we need to tackle these crises together in an integrated way, to look for synergies in the way we tackle these crises, in the policies and the measures that we take. And if we do that, we have the best chance of maximizing social benefits and social welfare. If we tackle them separately, then we risk running into significant social problems. So here at COP27, we're doing our best, many constituencies and governments, to push forward a strong message on the need for ecosystem conservation and to protect ecosystem integrity as a key part of the climate action. And we want this COP to send a really strong message to the COP for the Biodiversity Convention, which will be celebrated in Montreal in Canada under the presidency of China just within a very few weeks. So we need the climate community to say to the biodiversity community, do a good job in Canada. We need that strong message to come out of this COP. And we have a whole range of tools to try to help us do this. We have regulatory instruments, we have planning and zoning policies, we have renewable energy capacity auctions, public funding support, criteria and conditions from investors, and we have new renewable energy and other technologies. But also we have protected areas for nature, we have species action plans and initiatives, we have environmental impact assessment of plans and policies and projects, we have participation and involvement of local communities, awareness campaigns, education, advertising, and media coverage. So to get us started, I'll start with you, if I may, Gonzalo. So here we are halfway through what the Paris Agreement calls the global stock take. This year, started last year, and will finish next year, where we collectively take stock of climate action and how we are doing as a global community in tackling the climate challenge. And I think in our panel we can maybe start with this, with a first round of questions, and do a mini global stock take of where we are with renewable energy and biodiversity. So Gonzalo, from your perspective in Iberdrola, how do you see this issue? How are we doing since the Paris Agreement on integrating well renewable energy and biodiversity?
Okay, good morning to everyone. And first of all, congratulations, BirdLife, for organizing such an interesting event, and thank you for the Spanish government for organizing such a complete program of. For me, talking about implementation, I think this is the single most important issue, how to assure that renewables, the development of renewables, the acceleration of the renewables development is good for people, for local communities, and for nature. This is the single most important thing. So, progress so far. We have seen progress in the last 10 years or 7 years, better knowledge of certain technologies, for instance, wind, not for others, not for offshore, not for photovoltaic, okay? So we are improving things. Greater social concern, you know, on biodiversity, and greater social pressure to do things right. This is, I think, is very positive. More complete and tough public regulation and policies, not in all countries, but in particular in Europe, this is a really important issue. And also greater commitments from firms. firms are understanding that we need to change the way we do things. Having a new culture of risk that if we don't think in a right way, this will imply cost for the firms in terms of economic cost and reputational cost. However, we are not moving at the necessary speed, and there is a huge room for improvement. So I think the only way to move forward is urgent collaboration between governments, between NGOs, between universities. Science is clearly a very important thing, and also between firms. And I'm here with 3 NGOs, and conservationist NGOs worried about climate change and nature. And I think you are in a unique position to help to move in these directions. On the one hand, we need you to tell us firms how we need to do things, how we have to develop our renewables so that they are positive, or they have the minimum impact on biodiversity, or even they have a positive impact on biodiversity. For instance, with solar photovoltaic, I think there is room for really improving biodiversity. But on the other hand, we need you for another issue. We need you to explain society and to explain local communities that the acceleration of renewables is key. Because the alternative, I mean, all the problems we are facing, the climate crisis, the biodiversity crisis, economic crisis, energy crisis, the origin is always the same. It's fossil fuels, an energy model based on fossil fuels. So people need to understand that to move from a fossil fuel economy to a renewable economy that is good for people, for nature, we need to see some local wind farms and photovoltaic, because people don't see the impacts of fossil fuels because they are not local. You know, they are on climate change, on pollution, other. So it's very important that people understand that the implications of this energy transition. Thank you.
Thank you, Gonzalo. We'll pass to Chiara. So the EU has been extremely active in this area in recent years. Many changes and updates of legislation, and just in the last few days, we're hearing of proposals to deregulate in the conservation legislation to enable a big accumulation of renewable energy projects to move faster through the system, which seems maybe to be reducing this idea of moving forward at speed on both fronts, on the energy and the biodiversity front. What's can Europe doing in this area?
Yes, good morning, everyone. Very glad to be here. Yes, I mean, I think with your question, David, I will continue a little bit along the line of Gonzalez, of course, focusing more from the lens of what's happening in Brussels and from the lens of the EU policies. I just wanted to flag, as Gonzalo,
It's okay.
Sorry. As Gonzalo said, that really the key word, if I look back at what you said at the beginning, David, of we are here in a global stock take, right? So the key word is urgency. Yes. And I think this, if I take a stock on where we are compared maybe to 5 or 6 COPs back, I think we need to highlight also that there is absolutely a growing awareness that the urgency is there, but also a growing awareness that when we speak about fighting climate change and protecting biodiversity, this is just one fight. I mean, there is no other way possible to move away, and I do feel that across civil society for sure, but also among policymakers and businesses, this is really a growing awareness that we need to use as a leverage, I guess, for moving forward. I think for me it's absolutely important to mention that also this moving fast is possible. And the science is telling us, and as can Europe, we are calling for 100% of a renewable energy system in Europe by 2040. And I think we need the help of everybody to normalize this message. This is possible. This is not an utopia, and we can make it. So I think what is important to highlight when it comes to the EU level and also the last days debates of like fasting, accelerating, what are the risks of this acceleration and all of that, I think it's important to highlight that we see as an awareness also that there is an absolutely urgent need for a strong legislative framework and policies that can help us, to keep the bar high, so to increase the overall ambition on renewables, but also to make sure and protect those provisions that are in place to ensuring a robust approach for mapping and planning, yes. But also that means to me also including safeguarding for environmental protection and safeguarding for social support. So really like a strong legislative framework, I think this is I think it's there in a way, like the machine is in motion, but we need to protect that, to not stop calling out that it needs to be at the EU level the absolute priority. And we have been, as a Climate Action Network Europe, we have been calling for such a strong legislative framework at the EU level since years, but in particular since the European Green Deal allowed us to be vocal in what is called the Fit for 55 package. And I just wanted to mention that right now, like also as a consequence of the energy crisis that we are living, there is the process going on what is called the Repower EU and the Renewable Energy Directive, where we really see at the heart of the agenda in Brussels, like the permitting issues and what that means, and how we can make sure that also fast permitting is the right tool that we can count on, but also the need for scientifically robust and adequate mapping and planning. I think this is really something we need to monitor and avoid with falling traps that actually perpetuate us in this fossil fuel system that you were mentioning. Maybe one last word, because we are a COP. I think when we think about stock take, we also need to think about what this renewable fast deployment means for the rest of the world. And what's the European responsibility when it comes to investing in the renewables energy transitions also in Africa? I know we don't have the time to go into that, but I just wanted to put that on the picture.
Thanks, Cara. That leads us really nicely into our two global representatives on the panel, starting with you, Rachel, from the IUCN. So, of course, you are here to represent a global community of governments and civil society organizations, and I know you've been very active in this question of the synergies, overlaps, and also some of the difficulties in bringing forward these two agendas. So, since the Paris Agreement, looking back, taking stock, from the IUCN perspective, how are you seeing this issue emerging around the world?
Well, I think to start off with, first of all, let me say thank you very much for the invitation. Hello, everybody. I'm really honored to be here. It's a real pleasure to be in the Spanish pavilion. I'll get straight down to brass tacks, as we say. I think there's a lot that we have done. There's a lot that we can say is real progress in the terms of rolling out renewables, and also in the terms that, you know, I come from a very unique organization where I work with NGO members, but I also work with state members, and I can say that there's a real agreement around the fact that we need to roll out renewable energies as fast as possible. Everybody has the same objective, and we're working towards the same goal. And there's a real desire to make sure that we learn the lessons from the fossil fuel era and we don't make the same mistakes again. On a company level, I have to say that I'm really heartened to see that more and more renewable companies are now looking at their footprints and looking at metrics and looking at how they mitigate their impacts towards biodiversity and towards local communities, and that they are really employing a mitigating approach towards their actions and ensuring that they have targets for biodiversity like no net loss and, as Gonzalo said, net gain targets, because I truly believe that they are possible both onshore and offshore, and at IUCN we're working with companies to develop case studies around that. So I'm in agreement with what my other two panelists have said, but if I can take on from Chiara, I would say if we are going to win this battle against climate change, we are going to have to learn that local is global and global is local. And so when we look at impacts in pushing out renewable energies, first of all, we've got to make sure that we're not having unintended impacts elsewhere, be they uncontrolled mining to get raw materials for the renewable energy projects that are happening within Europe, or whether we're looking at the oil and gas that are coming from other countries into Europe if we don't meet this transition goal that we all agree is so important. I'm very, as you say, I have a global perspective, so not only do I work on renewable energy, but my other project is actually around oil spill remediation in Nigeria. So I know the consequences of what Gonzalo's talking about, and I know the message that we have to give to Europeans around what the alternatives are and what the effects of the alternatives are to other people around the globe. And I can tell you now that my colleagues in Nigeria would far rather be talking around to local communities around the prospect of having wind farms than around the prospects of having medical complications because of hydrocarbon contamination in their water and in their fresh fish and so ever. So we really have to move the debate, I think, from local to global, because it's a global problem and we're all going to have to work together. And my final point is that there has been a lot of progress in Europe. I'm hoping, and one of the goals of IUCN is that we take the lessons learned from places like Spain and we help our members in other countries to make sure that they are able to capitalize on the lessons, the good stuff, and the mistakes as well, so that we learn as we move forward and we move the transition forward as fast as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel, for that initial intervention. We'll be having two more rounds of questions with our panel. Finally, Rhiannon, looking around the world around the BirdLife partnership, we have a whole host of initiatives and experiences. So maybe you could finish this initial round with a summary of your perspective, the global stocktake on issue from BirdLife International.
Yeah, so I think we know here that since Paris, the transition to renewables has not really been quick enough. There is a current energy crisis that we know of because of our dependency still on fossil fuels. We know there are positive signs with countries such as Kenya committing to 100% renewables, and these are really welcome. But and there are many other countries who are increasing their speed of their transition to renewables. But we're still seeing that ever-increasing loss of nature, and we're seeing this from all our BirdLife partners around the world who are working hard to try and address this biodiversity crisis through working with companies such as Iberdrola, who I'm going to throw a challenge back to you. You've put the blame on NGOs in a way, or responsibility to NGOs to help you. What are you doing? How are you contributing? It's not NGOs, we're here to help, obviously, and provide advice, but you have the funding, the resources that we don't have. I'm holding you to account and saying private sector has a lot to do here, because we know from BirdLife's recent 2022 State of the World Birds Report, little plug here for BirdLife, it's found 49% of bird species worldwide have declining populations, with many species at risk of extinction. with many of those important sites of birds deemed to be in unfavorable condition. And we know why this is, because there's habitat loss, fragmentation, degradation, pollution, disturbance, and collision with infrastructure. So we need to see those companies stepping up, listening to NGOs and working with their engineers to design their infrastructure in different ways. And there are impacts from local and migratory species that we know about. We know that now, like, while we commend the attempt to speed up the transition to renewables, which we really need, this can't be done at the expense of rolling back environmental protections like we're seeing, you know, Repower EU in Europe at the moment. Like, while we want to see renewables fast-tracked, this cannot be done at the extent of nature. As David mentioned before, there's the IPBES report and PCC working group reports have come out, you know, all recognizing the role that nature has in keeping 1.5 alive. We need to make sure that our ambition around renewables does not impact on biodiversity. We need to protect our critical species. We know where we can put renewables safely. We know how we can do it. BirdLife itself is contributing to this through development of our spatial mapping tools, such as AviStep. We have what we need, basically, and we just need to work with the companies and governments to do it. Like, there's no 1.5 without nature.
Thank you, Rhiannon. That draws our first round of questions to a close. A lot of consensus on the need for collaboration, strong messages on the need for all actors in this debate to be speaking with the same messages, the need for urgency on renewables, progress on the installation, the rollout of renewables. A key question, thank you, Rachel. Renewable energies in terms of impact and presence in the landscape is far preferable to the colossal problems we have in many countries from pollution from fossil fuel installations and fossil fuel use. And I'd like in the second round of questions to focus in a bit more on the need for us to move forward quickly on both of these fronts in these coming years. What are the barriers that we have to overcome? Where are the bottlenecks and the barriers? Where are we facing the real difficulties? Maybe we could dig in a bit deeper in this round of questions, starting with you, Chiara.
Yeah. So on the barriers. Yeah, I think maybe first of all, I think we need to secure that we. I would say my first point is probably. Yeah, I'm just choosing which one is the first one. Sorry. But I think that if I really look at the concrete deployment of renewable resources, I think what you also said about global, local, is really looking at what are the local barriers. And I think here policymakers have the responsibility to equip local authorities to make sure that the staff is skilled, that there are the admin bodies and the admin procedures in place to make sure that this faster deployment can happen. I think this is what we are seeing across the European member states, is that when it comes to the concrete project planning and deployment, this is a very important barrier that we need to overcome. Staff in the local authorities is not equipped to do that. And then I think also I don't see really clearly when it comes to concretely putting, and that is the moment we are now. I mean, we know what we want. We just need to make that happen. I think is a bolder and more robust mapping and spatial planning that is still too vague and too at an initial, I think, status. And when I'm saying that, is really like really having an informed mapping where we can see before starting the implementation of the project, where are the risks when it comes to environmental protection and social protection. I think this is, I would say, are the two technical things I see as barriers in the implementation phase.
Okay, thank you, Cara.
Yeah.
I'll pass along the panel to Rachel. Ask you to focus from your perspective in the IUCN on one or two key barriers that you're seeing, maybe examples from specific places around the world or globally.
So I agree with Chiara. Spatial planning is a barrier, and in fact that we are at IUCN developing guidance around spatial planning. But if I can go into a more technical aspect, I think one of the barriers is going to be around offshore and metrics and assessment and monitoring of offshore effects, and that's another area that we are looking at as well. We've got a lot of data onshore, and we've got a lot of tools to help companies onshore to measure their impact. When we go offshore, it's a little bit that it's not, we don't have as many tools and as much data as we would like. So I would say in terms of the technical perspective, it's definitely around offshore. And then in terms of social, it's basically around working with local communities and agreements. And actually this is where maybe Europe can learn a lesson from the South and start looking at issues around benefit sharing and around how you engage communities to get agreement and consent, which in the South has been used a lot around FPIC. So it's lessons learned both ways. But I would say technically it's definitely around offshore and metrics.
Okay, thank you, Rachel. And finally, in this round, Rhiannon, we have a whole host of initiatives around the world looking at trying to make compatible the advance of renewables with biodiversity objectives. Could you give us a couple of examples of where you think the key barriers are looking out to 2030 to move ahead at speed on this?
Yeah, and I think the first point we can make is that nature is not the barrier. I think that's really clear, and I know often developers like to make that the barrier and say, you know, our environmental impact assessments take far too long, they're a waste of time. This is not the case. Nature is not the barrier. We know we can do this safely. BirdLife itself, as I mentioned before, has lots of strategic tools and best practice guidance to make sure that energy developments are mainstreamed across the global energy sector. We have some of our projects here locally in Egypt, the Migratory Soaring Birds project, which has tools related with that, making sure that across the migratory species here are less impacted. We need to make sure the policy and planning frameworks are in place to really make sure we're allowing appropriate siting. As you mentioned, spatial planning is really important. So I mentioned the Avistep tool that BirdLife has developed, and this is at the moment regionally focused around Asia. This was funded through the support of the Asia Development Bank and eAsia, but we are looking to actively expand this around the world, and our BirdLife partners are actively working with their local governments and the multilateral development banks to help produce this, because we know the financiers are really key to this, especially in developing countries. We need the community engagement process and consultation is super important. We have like our Brazilian BirdLife partner, Save Brazil, is really working around protecting their species and poor developments there, because we know that 34% of the world's bird species are at threat from climate change, with 18% of those from poorly designed and sited energy production and mining. And our renewable energy providers, such as Iberdrola, must be working to recognize their biodiversity impacts and the role that indigenous peoples and local communities can share with their cultural knowledge and expertise to make sure we have following that biodiversity mitigation hierarchy to ensure a nature-safe energy transition. So there's lots going on worldwide. BirdLife is working hard and working on a nature-safe transition to renewable energy is one of BirdLife's international key priorities around climate change, recognizing the importance and impact it has, and knowing that there are a lot of challenges to make sure we deliver that net zero alongside addressing the biodiversity crisis.
Thank you, Rhiannon. Gonzalo, a lot of messages for the business community relating to this question on barriers.
Well, they have already said everything. But for me, the real problem, you mentioned it, is the implementation in the territory. When it goes into the territory, and the big debate here for me, or for us, is how you distribute, how you minimize the cost, how you maximize the value, and this is the key question, how you distribute the cost and the benefits of this development. Why? Because all projects have some costs, and are the local communities that have their cost. And the benefits, you have benefits for local communities, very local, but not for the region. You have benefits for firms. And there is a debate now, at least in Spain, in Europe, because in some regions they produce this green power that is exported to other regions or to other countries to use this power to create value and jobs and so on. So, for instance, when it comes to green hydrogen, in Spain, in Andalusia, in Egypt, we produce the hydrogen, and northern countries, Germany is saying, okay, bring this hydrogen to Germany to maintain our industry that cannot rely anymore on cheap gas Russian. So I think we have to find for us, it makes much more sense to install, the users for industry, the industry near where the production of renewables is done, for environmental reasons, but also for local benefits in terms of people. So this is very complex issue, but I think definitely for me the barrier is the lack of dialogue, between all agents involved. So we urgently have to get together, firms, NGOs, universities, science, governments, to find solutions to speed up in a way that is positive for nature and positive for local communities, because if it's not positive for local communities, we are going to see huge barriers for the development of clean energies in this decade, that is the key decade.
Okay, so let's try to focus maybe on one key action from your different perspectives, business, NGOs, Spain, Europe, globally. One key action that could help us get there by 2030. We're identifying what's happened so far. We've identified barriers to moving forward. So let's focus on one key action which we think could help us achieve both objectives with social benefits moving out to 2030. Could we start with you, Rachel, on this round? One.
So I'm going to go for collaboration and sharing data.
Sorry, I didn't hear.
Collaboration and sharing data.
Yes.
If we can keep those as one.
No, that's an excellent summary with a lot behind it. We know there's a lot of work to do that, but unless we all are sharing information, the conservation community needs to do this, of course, and so do governments, and so do businesses, so that local communities have access to this information in looking at the need to move forward at this speed.
Yeah.
Rhiannon, for you, where would you focus as this one key win looking out to 2030?
Yeah, I think, Rachel here is right. Collaboration and integration is key. Like, we know there are data gaps out there for local species, and that is really hindering progress around some siting and things, because we know spatial planning is so important. But I think the big thing is integration as well. Like, one of the things we're pushing for here as BirdLife is to make sure that the CBD and UNFCCC are formally linked as one of our key asks for negotiations. This is recognizing the fact that the climate and biodiversity crises and agendas must be connected and are connected. So I think it's that thing, collaboration, as Gonzalo said, and integration of the climate and biodiversity agendas.
Gonzalo, do you have a further comment on those points that Rachel and Rhiannon have said, or something different?
No, I will add to that the urgency.
Yes.
Urgent collaboration. And I will also add responsibility for each part. We all have a responsibility. Firms, of course, we have to change the way we do things. And it needs to become strategic to be aligned with the new interests of society, that is climate change and biodiversity. But, you know, NGOs, universities, government, we all have a responsibility in an urgent way.
Chiara, we know the EU is trying to finalize a package looking out to 2030 again, so we have another revision that was already started, and now with the Ukraine-Russia war, a number of measures to tackle this current energy crisis. What for you is one key win that the EU could achieve between now and 2030 to help move forward?
I think the key win is, unfortunately, I will say, is to keep, and is also our role, to keep being the watchdog that existing environmental safeguards are part of the policies that are in dialogue and in the making. I think we welcome fasting and we welcome acceleration, but we do need to stick to the point of environmental safeguards to be part of the picture. This will help in terms of community ownership and community support, also of moving towards a different model of energy.
Okay, thank you. We have time for some questions from the public. We have one on this side, one at the back. Let's take these two to start, if we may. I see Carla from NABU and Javier from
here.
The first one here, the second one at the back, and we have a third one here. Let's take these three before we go back to the panel to answer. So Carla.
Thank you for this interesting conversation.
We can hear you.
Can
Do I have to hold it closer, or does it need to be turned up? Can you hear me now? Okay, I'll shout into the microphone. That kind of defeats the purpose of the microphone, but anyway. Yeah, thank you very much for this interesting discussion and conversation, and I think it's super important to bring this conversation to COP, the interlinkages between renewable energy and biodiversity. I want to zoom into Europe and then zoom out globally with my question, and then I have one more sort of, I think, food for thought question. Is that me? Okay. No. So we mentioned that, talking about barriers again, I think looking at, sorry? Oh, it's gone. The microphone is still on? Yeah.
All right.
Okay. So we had talking about barriers again and looking into Europe. I think in Europe there's been a lot of effort into identifying the barriers that are actually of more financial nature and staffing nature. So member states have not committed to enough finances and staffing within their authorization communities to move forward with permitting of renewable projects. So that is a huge barrier there. However, the EU has more or less focused more on exactly what we think is not the barrier, nature protection. Even though the EU as an entity should have enough finances to address this problem in a different way. And sort of, I think my question is about how do we see this dripping into the global community of looking at the EU and how it's handling these issues, and then potentially causing more issues for nature down the road in other areas. And then my food for thought is it enough to focus on doing no harm with renewables? We know that nature is already in peril, and we should actually use the renewable development initiative to lead way into restoration also, and not just local restoration projects on a project-based level, but looking collaboratively across all across the entire ecosystem and looking at an ecosystem approach and sort of leading that that effort, because it's just another pressure added on to an already overloaded space that we have. I hope that made sense.
Thank you, Carla. We have a question at the back. Javier from Spain, Ecologistas en Acción.
Hello. So first of all, thank you so much to BirdLife to prepare this meeting. I want to get deeper in another issue about renewables that never mentioned, that is the water use. So especially in Spain, because the Spanish government announced the previous year a platform about the drugs. One of the big problems in Spain is the energy lens water policy. In that sense, companies like Iberdrola, which receive from the dictatorship the hydroelectric use of the dams, have emptied the swamps during the driest years in the country to obtain enormous windfall profits. So my question is, how is Iberdrola going to adapt to this situation of continuous droughts, and also to the other panelists, will the infrastructures of water be returned to all citizens for public control? And thank you so much.
Thank you, Javier. We have in this round on this side, the lady in the pink suit has a question as well.
You're right.
I am Carmen Marquez, and I'm an EU Climate Pact ambassador.
We can hear you very well.
Can you hear me?
No.
My name is Carmen Marquez, and I am an EU Climate Pact ambassador. And my question is about this sharing of costs and benefits in Spain. You know, because now it is very controversial, the installation of photovoltaic panels in the rural Spain, in La España vacía. And it's a very difficult question that will have to be solved. We need renewable energy, but not at the cost of destroying the livelihoods and the beauty of our rural Spain.
Thank you. Okay, we'll wait for the next round. We already have 3 questions, so I'm going to start, if I may, Gonzalo. There have been a couple of questions specifically for Iberdrola on the water and dams management issue,
water and dams,
and costs and benefits for local communities.
Okay, Iberdrola, we use water to produce hydropower, and you know hydropower in the current energy model with a lot of renewables that are intermittent. Hydropower brings a service that is very important because it's the flexibility. Okay, in this context, in a country like Spain that is suffering water scarcity, and we will see more water scarcity in the future, okay, because this is one of the big impacts on climate change, we need to adapt to this new situation. So hydropower is going to change its role in the coming years. It's already changing the role from producing electricity to pump storage. So I think water will be used for other uses, for agriculture, for drinking, and for cities. And hydropower, we are not going to produce so much energy. We used to produce 15% of the electricity in Spain, and I think we will produce in the future 5%, but will only remain as a flexible pump storage, un sistema de bombeo, not using water, not consuming water, just bringing water upwards when there is a lot of energy, for instance, during the day with a lot of sun, or during the night, and produce when it's needed. So we are adapting to this new situation. Can I say something very fast on restoration, between minimizing impact and restoration? I think is key. I mean, restoration, and firms we are developing new, for instance, in my case, in my firm, we have approved, yesterday was announced a new biodiversity plan, apart from the climate plan, that our objective is to be positive in terms of nature in 2030. Maybe it's too late, but we are working on that. But for that, we would like to work with BirdLife International, with CAN, with all, on how to restore that, but because we are not experts on this issue. And the final question to Carmen, this is the question now in Spain, how to contribute, how renewable, photovoltaic in particular, can contribute to the social development and of these regions, of Andalusia and of Extremadura. We are launching projects and sharing part of these values. And, you know, for instance, instead of local industries, all our suppliers, or most of our suppliers, tend to come now for local suppliers. So we have to work more on that, and we are working with local communities and NGOs to assure that this is positive for people in terms of jobs, in terms of taxes, and is also positive in nature in terms of restoration and minimizing the impact. This is the debate now.
Could I ask other panel members if you would like to comment on this point that Carla raised?
Yeah.
She works from an EU perspective. One of the difficulties we have is we have clear regulations, we have a clear direction that's been set in European policy, and maybe what we don't have is the responsible authorities at national, regional and local level investing in the staff numbers and staff expertise needed to help us move at speed. If we're going to accelerate, then we can't have the public sector being a bottleneck and a brake on progress. What's your perspective on this within Europe and globally? How would you respond to this?
You start.
Yeah, I mean, if you want, I can start. I mean, that is exactly what I was saying earlier. I think the money needs to go where the barrier are and where we need where there are the leverage points to make this faster, this acceleration possible. And I mean, concrete examples that we need to push for are now all countries will be asked to revise their national energy and climate plans, for instance. The money needs to go also on this kind of staffing, reskilling, and all of that. We had some good and bad examples on how the recovery plans have been used in several countries in Europe. So I think is making use also of the EU budget and the EU funding work strands that are already in place to make sure that this is where the money will flow. And I just wanted to make a point maybe on also not sure if it's on the cost benefit on the restoration, but I just wanted to make it clear there are so many areas that will not harm nature that are still unused. I mean, I made a list here, like while I was in the bus, like artificial and built surfaces, rooftops, transport infrastructures, parking areas, brownfields that are used for waste, industrial sites, I mean, land that cannot be used for agriculture. I think this is the priority. I mean, that is where we need to start from.
Really interesting perspective, which is, I think that's growing in the conservation community, and it's a European priority now to identify the areas where it should be quickest and easiest to develop this new renewable capacity that we need, and of course involving the local communities in identifying those areas and in moving forward on that question. The rooftop solar initiative is a key question for the urbanized areas of Europe especially. Rachel and Rhiannon, how would you like to respond to this question on capacity, this question of capacity in the public sector, and maybe pick up on another point briefly if you wish?
So first of all, I'm actually part of an EU working group on wind energy, and I think that what is needed is really a political shift, and it speaks to what Gonzalo was saying about getting that urgency, and you have to build it from the bottom up, I think, and it has to come from populations actually demanding that the money is spent to make sure that the technical innovations that are coming are actually being able to be laid out on the ground. I think it has to come from the bottom up, because the top down doesn't work, and we can see that. I really liked your point around making a positive contribution, and I just wanted to say that we have actually in IUCN developed, just launched in Jeju last month, a white paper on nature positive, and I think that it is incumbent on renewable energy generators to be ensuring that they are contributing towards nature positive actions. But having said that, in this panel, I've really tried to concentrate on looking at your impacts and looking at the impacts of your supply chain, because I think we need to also be very aware that we don't move into possible greenwashing. And the first step is you control your impacts and you control the impacts of your supply chain. But I absolutely agree with you. Nature positive actions and contributions towards nature positive actions are essential moving forward.
Rhiannon, would you like to comment on this capacity issue or some of the other points that were raised in these 3 initial questions?
Yeah, I think I would just kind of build on what everyone has said here amongst the panel, that really political will is really important. You know, we know how, we know why, we know where, we just need to do it. People are working together already in a collaborative way. Like, obviously, yes, we can improve this to like really work on nature restoration, and there is still massive data gaps that we have that we know about. But there are collaborative platforms in place to bring these multi-stakeholders together at the multilateral level. I mean, BirdLife itself coordinates the Conventional Migratory Species Energy Task Force, which is bringing together those governments, NGOs, researchers, and financiers. But yeah, the political will, we need to make sure that those climate and biodiversity agendas and the governments are delivering on what they're promising. And we need to do it quickly. As we say, that urgency is the key point. I think, Kari, you may perform.
Thank you, Rhiannon. I know we have one more question. Any others? I'm particularly interested in hearing from amongst the audience, industry, the financial sector, media, and the public sector. If we have any of those sectors represented in the room, that would be great to have some questions from there. I think Ken we have here, and we have 2 more, the lady there and here, Larry. So Ken, go ahead. We'll take 3 more, and then we'll close this session of questions. Go ahead.
Thank you. I am Ken from BirdLife International. Some people believe that renewable energy does not deliver as much power as the other types of energy, and that is in Africa. That's a dangerous proposition, because it can be used by governments to stick to fossil fuels and the other non-renewables. So what innovations are required to accelerate access to renewables by local communities, the people on the ground, without harming biodiversity?
Okay, thank you. We'll take 2 more to close this round. The lady there on this side and a gentleman here on my right. We'll take the 3rd question. Go ahead, please.
Good morning. I think you can hear me. Not very well. Yeah, okay. So my name is Mercedes Maroto-Valer, so buenos días. I'm actually a member of the Council of Engineers for the Engineering Transition, so this is advising to the UN General Secretary. And one of the things that we're looking is clearly the transition, the urgency that you all have said. But what I haven't heard is that really in the last months, because of the geopolitical trouble, we have taken a step back in many countries. So could you comment a little bit back into the energy trilemma, what is not only about environment, but it's also the security of supply, and there is the affordability. And I think we need to bring that back to the front. Thank you.
Thank you. And the last question, and then we'll go back to the panel. So you almost need to shout, introduce yourself, and go ahead, please.
Yes, Larry Moffat, representing the Press Club Brussels Europe, and a member of the citizen movement Rise for Climate Belgium. Ideally, the effort to fight climate change by increasing renewables and the effort to protect biodiversity would work in harmony and even in a nature positive synergy. But inevitably there will be conflicts. Building a solar farm in an environmentally sensitive area, or a Tesla gigafactory in a forest in Germany, or a wind farm along a bird migration path. So even with the best use of spatial planning tools, do we have to accept at some point that we may need to sacrifice certain species for the collective benefit of the biosphere and to save the planet?
Okay, so we have basically 3 points. If I've heard them correctly, sorry, the sound is not too good. But we have one on how do we ensure that local communities have direct access to the possibility to have renewable energy. If we maybe if we think of countries where at the moment people don't even have access to electricity coming into their homes, how can we tackle this question? Sorry if I haven't understood you correctly, Ken. Was that more or less your question? Thank you. A second point on the whole issue of the security of supply, raw materials, supply chains, this difficult period in energy prices, which started before the Ukraine war and has now got obviously much more serious. And finally, a really interesting point, quite a provocative one. Thank you, Larry. Should we be prepared to make some sacrifices for the greater good in moving forward quickly on this agenda? Who would like to start on this? Who wants to jump in? Gonzalo, go ahead.
Okay, very fast. What I can tell you is that renewables are becoming extremely cheap. You know, there are the cheapest solutions or cheapest options to produce electricity in 99% of the world. So there are solutions off-grid, you know, self-consumption is becoming extremely cheap, and there are a lot of firms providing these services, you know, in a very, this is what I think, in a very competitive way. And for, you know, for countries, I think the importance now is that for the first time we have an energy that is renewables, that is at the same time clean and cheap. So this is changing everything. Clean and cheap, and also safe, energy security. So regarding the second question, the step back. We are seeing, I mean, we are suffering several crises at the same time. So we have the climate crisis, the energy crisis, biodiversity crisis, and the origin of all these crises are fossil fuels, an energy model based on fossil fuels. In terms of energy crisis, the current energy crisis, the current prices are the result of a model based on natural gas. So in this context, is positive for the energy transition, and we are seeing an accelerating of energy packages for renewables in most of the countries in the United States, in Europe, Australia. So the solutions are the same, renewables. What is important is that these short-term measures, for instance, I don't know, diversification of gas, are measures that are short-term but are not facing the long-term programs. So what we need is regulation, you know, short-term regulation that is perfectly aligned with the long-term objectives. But for instance, the International Energy Agency released the World Energy Report, and identified that in this decade we are going to see the peak consumption of fossil fuels, not just for the climate crisis, but for energy security. So, and the third thing, the sacrifice. I understand your point. However, I prefer them to answer this question because I'm not.
I'll thank you, Gonzalo, for dodging that one as well. But there are others in the panel who can pick it up, especially as nature is not the problem.
Yes.
Nature is not the problem, and maybe shouldn't be suffering the consequences of the problem. But anyway, let's move to our other panel members. Quick reply. Maybe you want to choose one or other of the questions. We're slightly pushed for time, but go ahead. Rachel, do you want to and then Chiara and Rhiannon?
I will start with the Africa question, which is that I think there are solutions to make energy more accessible, but the big issue in Africa is also about grids and transmission, because you face the same problem, and unless you can get electricity to people, it doesn't really matter how you generate it.
Yeah.
You've got the same problem, and so we need to work on that issue. I'm going to tackle the big issue that Gonzalo very kindly gave me as a present.
Go.
I would say not yet. I've been through this process before. It's a little bit deja vu, because 6 years ago in IUCN, I was working on the IUCN offset policy, which was really about what do you do when you've got oil and gas in specific locations and you've got threatened or endangered species. Do we accept damage? What I would say is, at the minute, there are enough alternative locations, I believe, that we don't need to have that debate. We can move on to that debate when if the time arises. I'm not sure it will, but it may arise. And we will have to ask for mitigation measures, and we will start looking at offsets as well. As somebody who helped draft the IUCN policy, I will say that my analogy is offsets are a little bit like circling around Heathrow waiting to land. They're not a definitive answer. They're a good enough for now, but it doesn't solve the problem. So I would say for as long as we can avoid having to deal with it, the better.
Okay. Rhiannon, Chiara, go ahead.
Yes, so just to go on the big question, I mean, following what you said, Rachel, I would say yes, not yet, but we need to prepare now to have this. And I think the best way to address this issue, and I think the best way is what we have been saying at the beginning. I think you said, like, we need to start a deeper dialogue across different stakeholders. Because otherwise, I think we will not be prepared for such a big challenge.
Yes.
Then, regarding the question on security, I mean, building up on your answer with Gonzalo, I think what is important to say is that these short measures, we can't allow those short measures to lock us in the same system that brought into this energy crisis. And I think we should name this is a fossil fuel crisis, is not an energy crisis. I think also narrative matters. So I think this is very important. And on the point on gas, I mean, we do all need gas this winter. I think what we need to be extremely firm is that there is no way to new infrastructures for new gas. Because otherwise we will go back to where we are and what brought us to this situation. And then the point on the question from Africa, I think I mean, I'm not so much expert on what could be done in Africa, but I think when I got this question about renewables as not providing enough energy, enough power for the lifestyles we have today. So in Europe, we need to change our lifestyle. I think this is important. Yes. I think people are ready, and we need policies that need supporting these more sustainable lifestyles. But also that we need to keep the priority on energy efficiency. I think there is still too much energy that is wasted. So I think this is, for me, the priority.
Thank you. Rhiannon, to close this round. And then we'll go to a final set of conclusions. Rhiannon, in response to some of the questions.
Yeah, I'll just come to Larry's question around the sacrificing. I'm in complete agreement with Rachel. We can avoid it. We don't need to have that question. We know we can. We've done the work. We've done the mapping to know that we don't need to sacrifice species yet. And hopefully, I think if we focus also our work around mitigation and aiming to net zero with adaptation, we shouldn't have to do so. Sorry, my microphone is hitting me in the face. But yeah, I think that's the thing is we know how, we know where. We shouldn't be sacrificing. We should be restoring and halting biodiversity loss.
Thank you. Let's draw a close to the round of questions. Thank you for all of your input and your interest. I'd like to conclude this session offering each of you a chance, just in less than 1 minute, one key message that we need to take away from this COP, looking forward to the biodiversity COP, one key message where there's something that we can achieve and we should achieve in this area of renewables and biodiversity as we look to the biodiversity COP. And let me just remember my running order. So start with you, Rhiannon. Would you like to give us a key message that we need by the end of this COP, looking forward to the biodiversity COP in Montreal in December?
Yeah, I think the just key one is that integrated approaches to the climate and biodiversity crises through a rights-based approach has never been more critical. And all of us here, whether it's NGOs, government parties, private sector, etc., must step up. Like, we're not doing it fast enough. We know this, and we need to do it together, and we need to make sure we're holding the political pressure here into the CBD in Montreal. We need them to deliver on the global biodiversity framework, and we need the UNFCCC and this COP27 to put the pressure on, knowing that biodiversity and climate are completely integrated. Let's do it.
Thank you, Rhiannon. Gonzalo, from a business perspective, from Iberdrola, one strong message from this COP to the biodiversity COP. What do we need?
We need that renewables are good not only for climate but also for people and for nature. We need to do that. We can do it. I agree with what you say. And for that, we need responsibility. Each of us have a responsibility and collaboration.
Excellent. Thank you for your brevity. I'll hand over now to Chiara from the EU perspective.
Yeah.
What would you like maybe the EU to be pushing for in this COP, arguing for, looking forward to the biodiversity COP in Montreal?
Yes, I think looking back at where we start with the stocktake, I mean, I think the message for the EU from here to the biodiversity COP is like, walk the talk. I mean, policy coherence. I mean, we do have progress in terms of the legislative framework that we need. We just need to continue that path and not fall in traps in we are the other agreements all over the world.
Thank you. Rachel, I'll give the last word to you as an organization that represents NGOs and governments and also works with businesses. From here to Montreal, what do we need?
Okay, I think I will agree with everybody, but I will add, let's learn the lessons that have already been learned. There's a lot to do in Europe, but actually Europe are 4 leaders in terms of renewable energy. So I would say let's see how we can move those lessons to the rest of the world, because actually a lot's been done in 20 years when you look back.
Yeah.
So let's not redo mistakes. Let's keep moving forward globally.
Thank you, everyone. I'll just draw this to a close now. Thank you all to the public here at COP27, the people who are following us online on our YouTube channels, and maybe just conclude by saying I think we've done a pretty good global stocktake in our panel on where we are on this issue, and it would be great to see some of these messages going into the formal global stocktake process here at this COP. So I'm sure all of us within our organizations will push for that, so that this global stocktake process really recognizes the importance of this issue in its conclusions document at this COP, sending a message to the COP15 of the Biodiversity Convention in Montreal in December. Thank you, and please round of applause for everyone participating.